魂込めた一人の男が今日も行く真面目に遊ばぬ奴らには体で覚えさせるぞセガタ三四郎セガタ三四郎セガサタン四郎セガサタン
Is it any wonder that the Saturn did better in Japan than it did here in America? Part of the reason the Saturn didn't do so well here in the States was primarily due to the fact that the head of Sega of America at the time had a very specific idea of what he thought would do well in America. So a lot of the console's best RPGs and the like ended up getting left in Japan, and when they were brought over to the States, they weren't given much recognition. And it's kind of foolish that they chose to do that, considering this was around the time when, you know, a lot of those barriers between the East and West were being broken down. Final Fantasy VII, need I say more? So when Mysteria Realms of Lore came to the States as Blazing Heroes, it didn't get a lot of recognition from Sega of America. They just kind of shrugged it under the rug, and it ended up not doing terribly well. But those who would play the game would find a fairly competent turn-based strategy game, and it would go on to become one of the more popular games on the system amongst collectors at least. The game basically centers around a banished prince and a group of warriors who attempt to free his kingdom from an evil tyrant. There isn't a whole lot to the story here. If you played something like Shining Force or Fire Emblem, you basically know what to expect. But it does at least do a good job telling its story and giving these people some decent characteristics. As for the graphics, I'm not terribly fond of them. It kind of looks to me like a Genesis or 32X game that was sort of beefed up to a Saturn release, which was fairly common at the time. I mean, that's not the last time that would happen, but I don't know. The look of this game just doesn't do it for me. Music is decent though, can't complain too much about that. As for the gameplay itself, it is predominantly a turn-based strategy game, not too dissimilar to Fire Emblem, actually. Though, like it in Shining Heroes, it can be a little hard to get the same amount of depth out of the game because the characters don't have the same defined strengths and weaknesses that you would find in Fire Emblem. There's still plenty of strategy that needs to be considered in this game, and one thing that set Blazing Heroes apart from other games of its time was the fact that you had varied objectives. Rather than just clearing out the opposition, sometimes you needed to reach a certain point, you needed to defend a point. You definitely had to do more than just outplay the enemy. So they definitely did good there. So it is a fairly competent strategy game. I won't make any arguments about that. While it didn't do terribly well here in the States, it did do well enough in Japan to get a sequel, which would be released as Riglord Saga 2, which unfortunately was never released here in the States, though I believe there is a fan translation that you can use. But really, if you're going to play a turn-based strategy game on the console, I would probably recommend Shining Heroes or Dragon Force over this, and we'll be getting to those games later on in the month, so stay tuned for that. But Blazing Heroes, definitely a decent game, worth checking out if you got the console.